We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
Bob, this is Gene, and I'm on the surface. And as I take my last step from the surface,
go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
we leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return. With peace and hope for all mankind. Oh, it's beautiful, Mike. Got the flag up now. You can see the stars and stripes.
Private space station.
And welcome to Spacevidcast Live, episode 6.17 for Saturday, June 15th, 2013. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me, as always, the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, and talented Carrie Ann Higginbothams will be your host for this episode. And if you like that opening, which is a little bit different from our normal opening, that is going to be, that is the promo video for the book Not Because It's Easy. There, see, easy for me to say. There you go. Not Because It's Easy on the Kindle. So you can get that Kindle. You can also buy that on Amazon.com right now. It's George Schellinger, and he will be joining us in our second segment talking about that book and all things space, and maybe a little bit of sharks as well, because he does exploration.
Sharks in space?
Sharks. Dude, we got a Twitter handle coming up with that. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about some space news. Coming up first, we had the launch and docking of the Shenzhou 10 rocket and spacecraft to Tiangong 1. Now, we couldn't find any docking coverage, but here's the launch coverage.
And we have a liftoff. The liftoff of Shenzhou 10 and the astronauts on board pretty happy and confident and waving their hands to the command center here on the Earth. And now Shenzhou 10 is on its journey to space to join China's prototype space lab Tiangong 1, which was launched in 2011. And it's getting higher, and now the separation of the boosters, the 4 boosters were let go. And the next will be the second stage being separated. Now the separation of the booster and the spacecraft. So the spacecraft Shenzhou 10 is on its own to get to the orbit.
Although they're traveling very fast,
They're traveling very fast.
5 kilometers per second.
Yeah, 5
Their
kilometers per second.
Their relative velocity is very small.
That's why they can rendezvous and docking. Now we have seen the solar panel unfolded. That means the spacecraft can use the solar energy to power itself.
And that's kind of the moment where a lot of spacecraft, and Carrie Ann pointed out before, well, as we were in the clip, I didn't mention that was a manned mission. So there were humans on board going to Tiangong 1, which is their floating space station. It is not the International
And when you say
Space Station.
they, you mean China?
China. It is China's
manned
space
mission.
station. Well,
Okay.
because we, the U.S. and the conglomerate, wouldn't let them be part of the International Space Station.
Right,
So they were
so-
like, fine, we'll make our own.
China made their own.
And they did, and they've launched, again, more humans. They're going to be up there for a little while. They have docked successfully to the space station as well. Like I said, unfortunately, we don't have any docking coverage of that. But congratulations to China. That, not an easy feat to do any of that.
And I appreciate that they're very encompassing. What am I trying to say? It was 2 men and a woman that they launched. So I appreciated that there wasn't a completely manned mission.
Now, last week we talked about the launch of ATV-4, Albert Einstein, the automated transfer vehicle. This week we've got, check this out, docking coverage. Yay. So this is the very slow. Everything in space is slow, right?
Well, seems slow. It's what he was.
Well, it's fast. It's
relative velocity, right? So
it's fast and slow at the same time.
Right. Well, because and also when you're going that fast, you want to go a little bit slower to make sure you don't break into things.
Yep, exactly. So here we go. ATV-4 docking with the International Space Station. It's unmanned, so it's giving supplies to the crew of the space station. They'll also use it as basically a giant garbage container. So they'll throw all the stuff that they don't need back into that when they're done. They'll detach from the space station and let it burn up in Earth's atmosphere. This was a fun one that I had seen from, I think it was Reddit or something like that.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out where this came from.
Oh, no, it came from The Verge, actually, is where it came from. Yes,
okay.
That's where it came from, not Reddit. This is a site called lonesignal.com. Before I describe what it is, let's play this video. Check this out.
Have I ever wondered if there's other beings in outer space? There has to be, statistically speaking.
I think that there's definitely somebody out there.
Yeah, I think there is something up there.
I hope they realize I'm one of them.
Love has no boundaries, so why not?
I mean, really, I'm in love with this one alien that I keep talking about. To take one object in the space with me, I would take something for pleasure.
It would be a pencil.
Nothing.
Please don't hurt us.
We should send messages to aliens, of course, yes.
So what do you think that is?
Well, okay, so...
Or do you already know what it is?
No, actually, when I first saw it, my initial reaction was, what a great psychological experiment this would be. Because it sort of, again, reminded me of the show that that BBC did with telling people that they were actually going into space and it was just a fake reality show.
Right, we figured out anti-grav, stuff like that.
Right,
yeah.
right. And that's how it struck me, but it really interesting. So
that's not what it is. Although that would be fun.
I think so.
What it actually is it's your ability to send messages into space. It's kind of like SETI, I believe they're calling it METI, which is Messages for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. You can go to their website, which is lonesignal.com, and you will be able to, when they launch, a little bit later on, in less than a week, when they launch, you'll actually be able to use one of their radio transmitters and actually broadcast your message out into the cosmos. And I believe the first message will be free, and the next message will be 99 cents thereafter, or something like that. I'm not sure what currency that's actually.
So we're creating ringtones for aliens.
We're creating ringtones for aliens.
That's the way they really should market that.
Yep, you got it. So that's going to be, it's interesting, but it's still fun, right? It starts conversations about space,
sure.
And I like when we start conversations because then people start thinking about it. So there you go. We'll start some conversations. One of the other big conversations I like talking about is planetary resources. They're 15 days away from their $1 million Kickstarter campaign, and they're $100,000 to go. So less than $100,000. Check this out. This is the current slate as of right before the show. They're at $901,841. And 15 days left to go, but they have a stretch goal now as well, which is if they get to $2 million, they'll be able to actually search for exoplanets. I'm like, aliens. No, exoplanets. So here's the stretch goal, searching for exoplanets. So whatever we can do to get them to their $2 million goal would be awesome, right? Now, the way Kickstarter works, if you kind of go back, I actually thought they were going to reach their $1 million goal, but there's this, so you start really, generally speaking, you start really strong. Everyone does stuff for like half a week to a week, and then it just goes thunk and dies off. And then you're like, oh no, I didn't reach my goal until you get to the very end, at which point it goes whoosh and skyrockets again. So, before it dropped off, they made over half right?
Yeah,
they made it
dude.
to around $500,000 to $600,000.
That's
So I knock on wood, I have very little doubt that they'll actually be able to make it to the $1 million mark. But will they be able to make it to the $2 million mark?
It's exciting.
This is, again, one of those things that really starts conversations going, because this is your space telescope. Planetary Resources will have a bunch of these telescopes, but they're dedicating one to the masses to do whatever you want to do with. And that's why it's only $1 million as opposed to the $10 or $100 million it would normally cost, is because it's part of a larger fleet. But they said, you know what, we want to just give it to you guys so you can play with it and see if you see what you want to do with it and start conversations, get your picture in space selfies, as they like to call it. It's a very compelling and awesome program, and I encourage everyone to go over to the Planetary Resources Kickstarter campaign. We'll put the link in the show notes, and I don't want to say donate, that's not the right word, but sign up for one of their packages there. And
become a backer.
And it doesn't just have to be you, right? You probably work for a company somewhere. Get your company to sponsor something. They can probably do a bigger $10,000 package or something like that, and then make that company can use that as a gift for employees, or they can give it out or be like, hey, look how cool we are. We're doing space telescope stuff, right? I mean, don't just use individuals. Companies can do this stuff too, and help. Get all of them involved. Be that guy that goes to your manager, that goes to your PR team, your marketing firm.
Boy Scout groups, Girl Scout groups, volleyball groups, I guess. Any one group of people can just sort of band together and really make this happen. It would be amazing.
Now, before we go to break, just really quickly, there's one last note in our wiki for the space news, and that is if you go to spaceindustrynews.com, you're going to see an article about how the U.S. Congress has no love for NASA's asteroid program. So speaking of asteroids, one of the things that President Obama's administration said they wanted to do was send a robotic expedition out, grab an asteroid, pull it back to Earth, and then send manned astronauts up, actually kind of explore it, do cool things with it over here in the safety of our backyard, as opposed to having to go way over to like Mars or something like that. And basically Congress has said, look, Space Launch System, good. Orion, good. Asteroid, not going to happen. So that's where we're at with that. So we'll continue to follow that and see where it actually ends up. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, George Schellinger of just space fame, I guess, is going to be on talking about his latest book. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
So for the next object I was going to make on the MakerBot, decided I was going to print a Mercury capsule. There we go. The top of that didn't print very well. The model looks fine on the outside. So the bottom half of this to print. Here's my little Mercury capsule.
Our own in-house crazy rocket scientist Vax Headroom making stuff on his 3D printer, which is really cool.
I particularly love the sideways headshot. That was
fun. We are joined now by George Schellinger, author of Not Because It's Easy. And it's not easy to see that book cover on my Kindle, so I apologize. George, welcome to Spacevidcast. Oh, I can't hear his audio. Could we bring him? There we go. So actually, welcome back. I should have said welcome back, George.
Thank you. Greetings from a little bit south of the Space Coast, enclave here on the beach, where we are looking at all things space.
So, tell me a little bit about your book before we get into kind of some of your other space nerdery. Mm-hmm. What is this? This is not so a lot of the books that we bring on the show are factual, like looking at the past kind of stuff. This is more of a fictional book, but with fact built in. So can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, so Not Because It's Easy is basically an adventure story wrapped in the history of Project Apollo. So basically it's a modern day moonwalker who walked on the moon during the Apollo program, decides that, hey, the infrastructure of Apollo, all the blueprints are there, all the data's there, let's build this thing and go back to the moon. But the U.S. government has its thoughts as well as the president, and it may not be so easy to get back to the moon. But that's kind of it. So it's a chase that crosses southeast and ends in orbit around the Earth, and it's interesting, but based a lot on the history of Project Apollo.
So it's actually a lot of the scientific data is actually factual, like what you actually would need to do to get to the moon is actually correct, and how we got to the moon in the book is also correct.
Right. Well, the main character really spends a lot of the time explaining how he went to the moon during Project Apollo. I think it's going to make the moon hoaxers extremely angry, because it does look at all the facts behind Project Apollo, and the fact that we did it, and we did it 40 years ago, and we haven't been back, and that to me is unacceptable, and it is also to the main character in the book, just completely unacceptable. Let's do it. Let's take the infrastructure that's already there, improve it with things as simple as the technology in an iPhone. I mean, we have amazing stuff that we could put in an Apollo system and go back to the moon. We did it once. Let's do it again.
Is that why you wrote it? Because you want us to go back? I mean, we've been at low Earth orbit for 30 years without stretching our deep space legs. Is that part of the inspiration behind this?
Well, the main reason I wrote this book is a tribute to Apollo. Apollo to me is, I mean, it's cliche, but it is a metaphor for success. I mean, everything we did to make that happen in such a short amount of time, we did, and we can do it again. It doesn't have to take 20 years. It doesn't have to take 30 years. We can do these things if we put our will against it. If we put the right force against it, we can do it. Kennedy dreamed big in 1961 and 1962. He said, we're going to send a man safely to the moon and return him to the Earth at the end of this decade. It wasn't a 20-year plan. It was an 8-year plan. It was like, we're going to do this. And we did it. And the thing about Project Apollo, and I know there are some in the space community that aren't fans of Project Apollo, and I can understand that to a certain degree, but also, at the end of it all, Project Apollo won us the Cold War at the end of the day, because the Soviets were thinking about strategic defense and initiative. They know what we know. If we put our minds to something, we could do it. And they said, you know, we can't outspend on Star Wars. So it was really the end of that Cold War. So yeah, there's a lot of good that can come out of Apollo, and sometimes I think we're a little too close to history to maybe fully appreciate it. But I can tell you, 100, 200 years from now, they're going to look back at Project Apollo and they're going to say, how did they do it?
Well, we have people doing that, right? You mentioned the hoaxers, right? Saying this was all a big hoax. We have people saying that right now. How did they do it? They couldn't survive the radiation. We didn't have the technology. I mean, we've been gone from the moon for so long that we no longer believe we went to the moon.
Right.
Yeah, that to me is unacceptable as well. Let me tell you, in my connections with the space community, I've been very fortunate enough to meet many of the men who walked on the moon. Neil Armstrong when he was alive, Buzz Aldrin, Alan Bean, Gene Cernan, and these guys, Alan Shepard, you could see it in their eyes that they'd been there, and they were changed forever. They saw the view of the Earth. I mean, think about that picture from Apollo 8, the Earth rising over the moon. I mean, that changed our perception of our place in the universe. I mean, I got to tell you, here's a very interesting story. Last week, it's the 500th celebration of the discovery of the state of Florida, and kind of coming here, and I toured one of these Spanish galleons. It's a recreation of this boat that sailed across the ocean, sailed across the Atlantic to the New World. I tell you, I looked at that boat and the fittings, and to think that those explorers were out on this boat at sea, going to a new world. The Saturn V was the same, and we'll look back at it one day and we'll say, wow, that was our ship to explore new worlds. And yes, it was the start, and maybe sometimes starts are hard to fully appreciate, but we did it.
It was a very expensive start, though. As has been brought up in the chat room, Apollo was not financially sustainable. It was designed to kind of not be repeated. It was designed to bankrupt another country, essentially. And it did, right? I mean, it was very successful in that regard, and that's one of the reasons we haven't been back. So do we now have the technology 30 years later, 50 years later, to be able to go back and sustain lunar travel or even Martian travel or going out into the cosmos?
Here's what I will say to that is, think about it. We've been at war now for 10 years in the Middle East, fighting over fossil fuel. I think if we had applied all that money, all those dollars, all the lives we've lost, think about if we applied that to a space program. I mean, how much better off would we be today if we spent the past 10 years and all that money exploring? I mean, that's what it comes down to. In the end, that is what will save us. And, you put a price tag on Apollo, everything that comes out of Apollo, and you talk about spin-offs from space. The ultimate spin-off from space exploration is we get to survive as a species. To me, it's that simple.
Well, that's above and beyond the moon, though, I would say, because what you're talking about is creating a backup of the human species out in the cosmos. And for that to truly work, we need to go beyond Earth and our own moon and over to Mars, and then even beyond our own solar system. So if something catastrophic does happen to the entire solar system, we're still out there somewhere.
Totally.
But is the first step our moon? Or is the first step, well, I mean, we already took that first step, but is the next step the moon, or is the next step Mars?
I was just at the International Space Development Conference in San Diego in May, and there's a lot of very fascinating conversations there. But one I found the most interesting, and it gets to the little interstitial you played before this segment, lunar 3D printing. If we could establish 3D printers on the moon, using the materials on the moon to make it, lunar cement, if you will, we could build even bigger infrastructure than we can here on Earth or in orbit. We could make great things on the moon. So yeah, I always believe that the moon is a stepping stone. It sits up there in the night sky to call to us, to make sure we know that, we have to step there to go out. And, I also, if you look back at Apollo, the other way I look at Apollo is a mutation. It was a technological mutation. And if you look at kind of the way space travel is probably meant to go, Apollo just happened because it was the will of a president who was assassinated. It was the Cold War. So you had these perfect storm of events came together to create Apollo. But I just don't think we should chastise Apollo. I mean, it got us to the moon. And, and the other thing about it is a lot of space is sometimes a compromise. That's what I love about SpaceX. They're not compromising. That's what I love about, Virgin Galactic. They're not compromising. Space, the commercial era of space knows they have to do what they have to do, and they have to do it safely, and it will be a lot different. But no, I think also Apollo as a motivator to go.
So one interesting thing you brought up was being able to look up at the moon. It's right in your backyard. What do you think the impact on humanity will be when we establish a permanent lunar base? Because I do believe that will happen sometime. Mm-hmm. And everyone from Earth can look up and see the moon and say, there are humans there. I'm sure that happened during the Apollo era, but that only happened for a couple days at a time. What happens when every night you can look up and say there are humans on that thing? What will the impact on society be, do you think?
When Neil Armstrong passed away, he told a great story that he would wink at the moon whenever he walked outside. And I think that knowing there are people up there, knowing we have permanent residence on the moon, I think that will inspire generations. And that is the key thing, is continuing to inspire the next generation to make sure they are studying science, technology, engineering, and math. And Buzz Aldrin has an interesting take on what's called STEM. He says it needs to be science, technology, engineering, art, and math. But I think that if we send the right team to the moon, it will inspire us. And here's the other thing. Now, the one thing that sometimes space becomes so routine, we don't realize that there's an incredible project right now on the International Space Station that's orbiting the Earth, the most complex, the most complex structure ever built by mankind is up there right now. And it's kind of sad because we don't really take time to appreciate it. We get so caught up looking down at the problems we face on a day in and day out basis. The great thing about the moon is it forces us to look up.
So you actually look up and down. So you look out to the cosmos, but then you also look into our oceans. You are unforgiving in your desire to explore everything here on the planet, out in the cosmos, everything. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in the oceans.
Well, the ocean and sharks are a big part of my work and what I do right now. And recently, we just took Sir Richard Branson to dive with tiger sharks in the Bahamas, and more about that coming up. But I believe that exploring the ocean is a good analog for exploring space. And until the price of a ticket comes down a little bit, I'm just going to be out there on the ocean, doing underwater work, experience, neutral buoyancy and things like that in a cost-effective way until I can go up. But exploring the ocean is tough. You're dealing. I have a lot of cameras, a lot of equipment I take to sea, so I'm dealing with, keeping all the equipment working. Like if you bring stuff to the moon, you're gonna have lunar dust. You're gonna have problems in that regard. So. Yeah, I love exploring the sea because it keeps me out there, and I think we're born to explore and see what's over that next horizon.
All right, George, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back to you in the After Dark segment after the show, and we're going to talk to you a lot more about your work with sharks, Operation Blue
Pride.
Blue Pride, thank you. I'm like, Prism. No, that's not the right one.
No.
Operation Blue Pride, and everything else that you're doing in the oceans in After Dark. So for those of you who are Spacevidcast Epic subscribers, make sure to watch that, or if you're watching Line 2 and after that. But thank you so much for joining us. Where can people get your book?
It's available right now on Amazon.com. You can get it on Kindle. You can get a paperback and or a hardcover. But what I'll do is I'm for however you want to give them away, I will send some fine signed copies to you all, and you can distribute them as you see fit.
And we will absolutely do that. George, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, viewer comments from last week's show. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled with awesome expectation. This girl's a fascination. And nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. Cause she's fire walking. She's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving. Through the heat, keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking. She's fire walking to be free.
Oh, last week's show. The topic was, well, it was, I don't want to say controversial show, but people certainly have their opinions. The topic was, do we need big government to continue exploring the cosmos? In other words, can we get to Mars without big government?
Right.
Are they required? Is it SLS that we need to have? Or is private space, SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, Orbital, companies like that, Orbital, companies like that? Well, they're 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Blah, blah.
Yeah,
Keep
right.
going.
So, are those the companies that we need? So the first comment comes from Ram. I'm not sure how to pronounce that name. Big government and private enterprise are both going to pull each other forward in space exploration. Both the government and private enterprises took part in it. They took different agendas, but both help each other out. I'll let you keep reading that one for the rest of the comment on your own. I agree, actually. I don't think it's either or. I think that they are here to help each other. And I'm not 100% sure about SLS in and of itself, but certainly when you look at entities like Orbital, SpaceX, in customers that are competing for COTS and CCI-CAP, which are the their COTS is the commercial transportation of cargo to the International Space Station, and CCI-CAP with the humans to the International Space Station. When you're looking at all this stuff, the fuel is the private industry, but the catalyst is NASA. And you need those two.
They go hand in hand in different ways. They're definitely different pieces of the entire puzzle, and it's hard to see the entire picture without all of the different pieces. That's kind of how we see it in general. So we basically agree with that. But always for the sake of debate, we like to sort of
start conversations and get people talking, right?
Exactly.
Because the more people are talking about space, the more their awareness about space is up. And we have every person, at least in the United States, every man, woman, and child, well, every man and woman, not really necessarily a child, has the ability to shape our future in space by electing politicians that are pro-space.
Right.
And so when you start these conversations, you can, in fact, shape how NASA is going to be based on your vote. And I think a lot of people are cynical and don't believe that anymore, but it is absolutely true. I think that government and new space kind of go hand in hand. Government isn't evil and new space isn't evil, and government is good and new space isn't bad. They're both necessary to get us out into the cosmos. And they always have been, actually. I should be moving on to the next comment, but they always have been, right?
Yes.
You look, Rocketdyne with Saturn V, and was it Rocketdyne at the time? I think it was Rocketdyne for the F1. Someone in the chat room correct me. Who built the F1 engines? I'm pretty sure it was Rocketdyne back then. But point is, we had a bunch of private companies that helped build the Saturn V rocket. It wasn't like NASA built the whole thing themselves.
Exactly.
So. All right, this comment comes from Glander Bronjerg.
I love these names. Keep them coming.
Thanks, guys. That's awesome.
Anything that Ben can't pronounce would be even better.
That's great. There's a long debated engineering principle that you can build or make something either cheaper, sooner, or better, also known as higher quality. You must choose at least two of those three options. The government showed us that going to the moon can be done by sacrificing cheaper aspects, where it was really posted in several NASA subcontractors. The engineering offices waste anything but time. I'm hopeful that commercial companies show what happens when you trade cost for time. And actually, that going back to my last comment, the idea basically being, like he said, you can either have it cheaper, sooner, or better. And in
not all three.
In Apollo, they needed it sooner and better, but they didn't care about cheaper.
Right.
But now we care about cheaper, but we need it cheaper and better. So it takes longer.
Right. And like Glander Bonjour is going to say, hoping that commercial companies are showing what happens when you do try to do all three at the same time. And I think that's what's happening. And it's funny because we're also frustrated when it's taking what we feel is too much time, because they are trying to do it cheaper and safer, as well as taking their time on it. You know what I'm saying? Like, making it better.
We're so used to iPhones, right? I mean, your iPhone, you get a new iPhone every year, and it's revolutionary every single year. Now it has LTE. Now it has a higher resolution display.
Well, I don't know if it would be revolutionary.
Well, that's why I air quoted revolutionary, right? So we get so caught up in these yearly refreshes,
absolutely.
And you don't have that rocket science, because in the next generation rockets, you truly have a new revolution of rocketry, right? I mean, looking, I'm obviously biased, but looking at the SpaceX engines, that's a completely new generation, a revolutionary engine that they're using, and they're going to do cooler things in the future too.
So I think that is what commercial companies are doing, is that they're trying their best to encompass all three, that perfect sort of Venn diagram there.
All right, this one comes from PVPC Tutorials. Ha, I can say that one. I don't think big government is the best chance, because the USA did a space program from zero to the moon in the 60s, but commercial space programs don't have to do much of this development, and so they don't have to spend that much money.
Such an interesting concept. I mean,
the work's already been done for you, so take it, regurgitate it. Actually, the same concept as George's book, right?
Right.
We did it once, rebuild it, do it again, right? We have all the blueprints. We know how we did it before.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it is fascinating when you think about it in those kinds of contexts of just It's already been done. Just do it again. It's gonna be all right. But
It's gonna be all right.
But going back to actually even just the previous comment of trying to do it cheaper, sooner, and better all at the same time. It wasn't a perfect system the first time around. There's definitely improvements that could be made.
There are a ton of improvements just alone in manufacturing. How we manufacture these vehicles. We've got friction stir welding now.
Yep.
I mean, duh, right? There's one thing. Second thing. Computers, right? Computers,
yeah, dude.
Wee bit more powerful now, just a pinch, just a touch more powerful. So you might be able to do a lot more. But as soon as you start talking about things like that, you're radically changing the structure and all the components of the vehicle. So you're basically building it from scratch.
You are basically building it from scratch. A little Battlestar Galactica, whatever's been done before will happen again. But at the same time, yeah, there are better ways to be doing things, cheaper ways to be doing things, faster ways to be doing things, safer ways to be doing things, and now that has become our focus, and I believe in that. So while
she believes,
I do. Those are the two sides of that particular coin of, hey, we already did this, why don't we just replicate that, it'll be fine, as opposed to, well, yeah, we did it, but why don't we do it better
and cheaper,
better,
faster,
and cheaper. Better, safer, all of the things.
Did you just Daft Punk me there?
Oh, maybe
a little bit. All right, this is from Monocum. All right.
Yep.
The U.S. government supports space exploration more than any government in history. Your complaint is, by the way, this was in response to another comment, not to me. Your complaint is akin to a carpenter blaming his hammer for not doing the work without him wielding it. The private sector has no chance to get to Mars without the government. There's no short-term profit in it. Interesting concept as well. I think no chance is a bit strong.
It's a bit strong.
Because Elon, it just takes one crazy billionaire, and we've got a few right now, right? So we've got Elon Musk, he's one crazy billionaire. We've got Sir Richard Branson, he's another crazy billionaire. We've got actually Amazon. Jeff Bezos is another crazy billionaire. All of whom are working on space programs.
Yep.
So, you look at someone like Howard Hughes in the past, and he's like, screw it, I'm just going to do it. This is the thing, it's fun, I'm going to do it, this is what's going to happen, I believe in it.
A different crazy billionaire.
Right? So it just takes a crazy billionaire to do whatever they want to do.
Duh.
You don't need the government, you just need a crazy billionaire.
Right.
So, maybe, and let's not... I think that these companies are actually coming into their own now, and they will be able to do this if the government doesn't want them to. But why go that far? Why not get the support of the government and do it faster at that point? So the government doesn't add safer or better. The government adds faster. And in the timelines that we're talking about, faster is good because people can't think that far.
Yeah, dude.
So if we can condense this under a decade, much like Apollo, condense it down, that's a good thing. And I think that will help quite a bit. I love how these are all over the board. This is Tim Like 01. The government is the main reason why we can't get to Mars. The government gave NASA a blank check during the Apollo years to beat the USSR to the moon. But after that, the same government decided that NASA needs less money and that there should be no human presence beyond low Earth orbit. What the face? In other words, it makes no sense to ask for space funding from people who don't know the difference between a retro rocket and a retrovirus. And very few people in Congress know the difference.
Ouch.
Well, that comes back to your elected officials. So,
that point was made inside of our chat room. The point I'm about to say was made inside of our chat room last week, which is that while it is still Congress and they still fall under the umbrella of the word Congress, it's not the same government. It's not the exact same elected officials. It's not the exact same, if it was the same exact people, people can change their minds. People are influenced by different things. We're not in the Cold War. All of these different factors have changed. And so things have changed. While it does sound really convenient to say, well, Congress said this one time, and then Congress said this another time. Yeah, like freaking 40 years later, 30 years later, like that's a completely different, that's an entire lifetime. You know what I'm saying? Like that's an entire generational difference at that point, and it's not the same anymore. It is unfortunate that there is less of a long-term view under such a umbrella as Congress. But it's not exactly the same. So it's a little bit unfair to compare those two, if you will.
All right, so I'm gonna. Normally, I would close the show because we're over time, but this is interesting, so we're going to keep going, and we're the internet, so we can do that. All right, so this is from Taylor Rance. Says, the only thing the government is good for is collecting taxes and spying on people. Space should definitely be separated completely from the government in order to avoid lengthy policies which restrict rapid growth in the space industry. But if you separate it completely, you separate the finance as well. Let's not forget that NASA gets over, they get over $20 billion with a B dollars per year. We are begging you, pleading with you to contribute to a Kickstarter campaign to get Arcade to $1 million with an M dollars.
Dude.
Right? And if you were to extrapolate that to a year, that would be $12 million. A far cry from the $20 billion that NASA gets now through our tax dollars. So I'm not sure that separating it completely is the right move, because there is some people just don't understand some of these values or understand timelines or finances necessary. There's some waste because it's government. But yeah, I mean, it sure would suck to lose all of that.
It would just be awful.
Michael V or Michael 5, I'm not sure which, at 1.46 billion, once again, with a B per mission. Not sure the correctness of
or proprietary. Or what?
That is not a real word.
Propriety.
Displaying and celebrating shuttles that has brought NASA to its knees and wasted over 30 years of hope. Basically, I'll let you read this comment on your own, so leave it up on the screen just for a moment. The underlying concept is the shuttle got us. The space shuttle is not something to be celebrated. The space shuttle is what got us locked in low Earth orbit for 30 years. It is what has prevented us from going back to the moon, and there is some truth to that, but at the same time, it was a magnificent and majestic vehicle that did amazing things. It did build the International Space Station. It did pull together parties that were fighting in the Cold War and helped pull them together through the International Space Station. And it did, in fact, get some people interested in space. I grew up with the space shuttle. That's all I know. I didn't grow up with Apollo, and I miss it. And part of me feels bad that we're going back to rockets and don't have these beautiful ringed spaceships. Right? That's these awesome. They fly up into space and they glide back down like a plane. That's really awesome. So I see what you're saying, and the answer is no. I see what you're saying, and I don't think we should be that harsh.
We should just be celebrating all of our achievements.
The space shuttle, yes, there you go.
I mean, it just not no matter how small exactly, but it is a huge achievement. We did accomplish something really amazing, and I don't see a reason to not celebrate that.
And finally, Super Multi AAA says, having robots is better. Humans do not need much resources. Well, true-ish.
No, it doesn't say do need too much resources.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So the idea being that you can send a robot up, and it doesn't need to sleep, it doesn't need to eat, it doesn't need shelter, it doesn't need, air to breathe. It doesn't need all of these things that if you were to send a human up to do the exact same thing would need. You have to take all of those things into consideration, and those usually rack up as dollar amounts rather than resources per se. And yet at the same time, when you look at it, the other side of that argument is, yes, but if you put a human up there, he or she would have been able to get all of that science done in like a couple of hours, maybe a couple of days, instead of years.
Yeah.
Years. So you're looking at, it's the age-old argument of time versus money.
Sure. So, for scientists who really want to do real science work on Mars, they really should be pushing for humans on Mars, because one human can do more science than has ever been done on Mars with our rovers in about 2.5 weeks. So, starting with week 3, that's gains from a scientific standpoint.
Right.
Plus, now we have a backup to humanity, and we can actually do other really cool things. So that will help push the science forward. Humans will help push the science forward. That's not to say that robots have no place. They absolutely do. Mm-hmm. We need robots to, as George was alluding to, we can have robots 3D print lunar colonies. We've talked about that before. That is awesome. Mm-hmm. We can have robots go down and actually pre-prepare the HABs on Mars. All of this has been talked about before. Robots can do amazing science. Space telescopes can do amazing things that humans just can't do. It's a combination of the two, much like we're talking about everything else. It's a combination between government and private space. It's a combination between robots and humans. And you shouldn't have one or the other. You shouldn't favor one over the other. You should have both working in tandem for this awesome, epic journey that we are on, which is called Humanity Visiting the Cosmos with Carrie Ann and Benjamin Higginbotham.
One little footnote very quickly. The second to last comment had a word that Benjamin and I, neither one of us understood. Apparently, our commenters are much smarter than we are. The word was propriety.
Propriety.
No. And it says, which is the definition of the state or quality of conforming to conventional. I can't talk it. Accepted standards of behavior.
It's
or
hard.
morals.
Hang on, guys. It is hard doing this. And
Live.
sometimes you hit a word and you expect it to be one other thing, and your brain goes, wait.
So it is a word.
And that's why we're not on television. And now we're going into After Dark, and I can grab my soda and set it on the desk, which I'm not allowed to do during the original show. All right, I'd like to thank everyone so much for joining us. We're going to go back to George in After Dark. We're going to talk about some of the awesome stuff that he's doing with sharks and the ocean. He actually has some really cool pictures that aren't really
Amazing
widely
stuff,
out
dude.
there, and we've got a cool video that we can get to show you. It's pretty cool stuff. So if you'd like to watch Spacevidcast After Dark, if you're watching live, stay tuned. It's up next. If you're a Spacevidcast Epic subscriber, that starts at $10 a year, starts at $10 a month or $100 per year. That's what will get you access to Spacevidcast After Dark, along with all the After Darks that we've shot, as well as exclusive interviews, content, a bunch of gigs and gigs and gigs of extra stuff. Spacevidcast Epic is what helps us produce the show. I'm doing this at 9,000 miles an hour.
Yes, you are.
Because I want to get into After Dark. So on that note, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week.
Organize and measure the best of our energies in film, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return. With peace and hope for all mankind.
And welcome to Spacevidcast Live, episode 6.17 for Saturday, June 15th, 2013. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me, as always, the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, and talented Carrie Ann Higginbotham will be your host for this episode. And if you like that opening, which is a little bit different from our normal opening, that is going to be, that is the promo video for the book, Not Because It's Easy. There, see, easy.
Go. And the next will be the second stage being separated. Now the separation of the booster and the spacecraft. So the spacecraft Shenzhou 10 is on its own to get to the orbit.
Although they're traveling very fast,
Although they're traveling very
at
fast.
5 kilometers per second.
Yeah, 5
Their
kilometers per second.
Their relative velocity is very small.
That's why they can rendezvous and docking. Now we have seen the solar panel unfolded. That means the spacecraft can use the solar energy to power itself.
And that's kind of the moment where a lot of spacecraft, and Carrie Ann pointed out before, well, as we were in the clip, I didn't mention that was a manned mission. So there were humans on board going to Tiangong-1, which is their floating space station. It is not the International
And when you say
Space
they, you mean China?
China. It is China's
manned
space
mission.
station. Well,
Okay.
because we, the U.S. and the conglomerate, wouldn't let them be part of the International Space Station.
Right,
So they were
so-
like, fine, we'll make our own.
China made their own.
And they did, and they've launched, again, more humans. They're going to be up there for a little while. They have docked successfully to the space station as well. Like I said, unfortunately, we don't have any docking coverage of that. But congratulations to China. That not an easy feat to do any of that.
And I appreciate that they're very encompassing. What am I trying to say? It was 2 men and a woman that they launched. So I appreciated that there wasn't a completely manned mission.
Now, last week we talked about the launch of ATV-4, Albert Einstein, the automated transfer vehicle. This week we've got, check this out, docking coverage. So this is The very slow. Everything in space is slow, right?
Well, seems slow. It's I mean, what he was.
Well, it's fast. It's
relative velocity, right? So
it's fast and slow at the same time.
Right. Well, because and also when you're going that fast, you want to go a little bit slower to make sure you don't break into things.
Yep, exactly. So here we go. ATV-4 docking with the International Space Station. It's unmanned, so it's giving supplies to the crew of the space station. They'll also use it as basically a giant garbage container. So they'll throw all the stuff that they don't need back into that when they're done. They'll detach from the space station and let it burn up in Earth's atmosphere. Easy for me to say. There you go. Not because it's easy. On the Kindle. So you can get that Kindle. You can also buy that on Amazon.com right now. It's George Schellinger, and he will be joining us in our second segment talking about that book and all things space, and maybe a little bit of sharks as well, because he does exploration.
Sharks in space?
Sharks. Dude, we got a Twitter handle coming up with that. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about some space news. Coming up first, we had the launch and docking of the Shenzhou 10 rocket and spacecraft to Tiangong 1. Now, we couldn't find any docking coverage, but here's the launch coverage.
And we have a liftoff. The liftoff of Shenzhou 10 and the astronauts on board, pretty happy and confident and waving their hands to the command center here on the Earth. And now Shenzhou 10 is on its journey to space to join China's prototype space lab Tiangong 1, which was launched in 2011. And it's getting higher, and now the separation of the boosters, the 4 boosters were
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
Bob, this is Gene, and I'm on the surface. And as I take man's last step from the surface,
go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to